This is an art journal that follows along with the Come Follow Me curriculum. Hey guys, I'm Jackie Lee Johnson, and this is the first video of the Come Follow Me art journaling series. I'll be posting a new video every Sunday, so if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, that way you don't miss any of the videos. In this video, we're going to be creating our title page for our art journal, which is really fitting because this week we're studying the title and introduction pages of the Book of Mormon. I'll be teaching some art techniques as well in this video. Although this art journal page can be created with any medium, so grab your journal, grab your art supplies, and let's get started. So the first thing I'm doing here is I am drawing the outline of what I'm going to be drawing. I decided to draw a scroll, and then I'm going to be writing over that. I like the idea of aged paper because it makes me think about the paper that the original transcript of the Book of Mormon was written down on. Before I drew this, I looked up a lot of reference photos to get an idea of what I wanted my picture to look like. I was getting ideas of how other people have drawn the same thing, different angles, different proportions, and I wanted to get an idea of the coloration of aged paper. After I looked at all my references, I had a really good idea of how I wanted my picture to look in the end. After I drew out my rough sketch, I decided that my page looked too plain, and in the end I really wanted it to have a pop of color. So I decided to draw flowers coming out from behind the scroll. I like to draw flowers that are pretty simple and not very realistic. I start drawing the flowers by making little petals in the middle, and then I make bigger and bigger petals all the way around until I'm done drawing the flower. Now I'm going to start painting my picture. I decided to use watercolors for this. You really can use any medium that you'd like. The only thing you might have to think about is whether or not you need to write your words first before you lay down color, or if you're going to be able to write over the top of whatever you're using. With watercolors, it's fairly easy to write over with a paint pen, so that's what I've decided to do. I'm using a really light brown color, and because I'm using watercolors, I'm putting a really, really thin layer down first because I'm going to be putting multiple layers down. Putting multiple layers down, especially when you're using a medium such as watercolors, gives your painting a lot of texture and depth. What I'm doing here was actually a really big experiment. I started laying down the color and I felt like it just looked too flat. So I looked around me and I found this plastic that was just left over from Christmas wrapping paper. I scrunched up the piece of plastic, and then after I laid down some color, I would dab it on the paint. And it made it so that some of the paint would pool in some spots, and some spots had a lot less paint. I thought it made a really cool effect and made it look like the paper was wrinkled. Now I'm preparing my paint for my second layer. I had the same brown color, but I added more yellow to it. Yellow is a really warm color, and I noticed when I was looking at reference photos that aged paper generally has a really warm tone to it. Right here I'm adding in more details. I wanted the paper to look ripped and torn, but I actually forgot to draw that in before I started painting. But that's okay because later on I'm going to be using the background color to kind of fill in those spots that I kind of already painted over. And in the end you'll notice that you can't even tell that I had painted there before. So here I'm adding in my second layer, and as you can tell, it's already looking so much more vibrant. I'm going to continue to add color until I'm happy with it. And underneath the folds, I'm going to be using a darker color of paint to add in the shadows. When I do shadows, I'm not using black. I'll often use a darker shade of the color that I'm already using. For this picture, I used a little bit of gray mixed with the brown because I wanted the paper to have a slightly burnt look to it. After I put in my shadows, I'm going to be adding the same color to the edges of the paper to kind of give it a border and to make the edges just look really worn and old. So besides art journaling, I actually wanted to talk about the Book of Mormon itself. Joseph Smith said, "I told the brethren that the Book of Mormon was the most correct of any book on earth, and the keystone of our religion, and a man or a woman would get nearer to God by abiding by its precepts than by any other book." I actually shared this story on Instagram earlier, but I wanted to share it on this video as well. One of my best friends left the church earlier this year. She had been a huge influence on my own return to the church years ago, so this really shook me to my core. I explained the reasons why she made this decision, many of them related to church history. I realized that although I had a deep testimony of Christ and his gospel, I did not have my own testimony that Joseph Smith was a prophet or that he restored the church to the earth. I decided I'd better do something about that, so I started researching deeply the history of Joseph Smith, the restoration of the church, and all the difficult things in the history of the church. I needed to know for myself. But before I delved into the history itself, which is always full of pure humanity, spotty record keeping, and a lot of holes, I decided to start by reading the Book of Mormon. I've read the Book of Mormon several times before, but not in quite the same way. As I read the book, I just thought, no one with bad intentions or wanting attention would make this up. Everything points to Jesus Christ and only promotes goodness. And I felt the Spirit whisper to me once again that this is absolute truth. So with that foundation, I dived into my extensive, months-long study of church history. I can now say that I do have a testimony that Joseph Smith was a prophet of God. He did restore the gospel to the earth. Reading the Book of Mormon truly has brought me closer to God than any other book has. I think even if we're raised in the gospel, we reach a point where we have to stop relying on our parents' and our leaders' testimonies, and we gain our own testimonies and are converted to the Lord. I wonder how much the Book of Mormon plays a role in that. For me, it was absolutely vital. I remember when I realized for the first time how powerful the Book of Mormon is, especially in converting people to Christ. I sincerely believe that if anyone honestly seeking the truth reads the Book of Mormon, they will feel deeply the truth of the book. Ezra Taft Benson said, "It is not just that the Book of Mormon teaches us truth, though it indeed does that. It is not just that the Book of Mormon bears testimony of Christ, though it indeed does that too. But there is something more. There is a power in the book which will begin to flow into your lives the moment you begin a serious study of the book. You will find greater power to resist temptation. You will find the power to avoid deception. You will find the power to stay on the straight and narrow path. The scriptures are called the words of life, and nowhere is that more true than it is of the Book of Mormon. When you begin to hunger and thirst after those words, you will find life in greater and greater abundance." So when I'm painting, I'm really impatient, so I use a hairdryer to dry my paint between layers. And the page did actually start to curl a little bit, so I'm blow drying the other side as well, and I'm kind of bending it back and forth so that it goes back to being flat. Now that I'm done painting the scroll, I'm going to color the flowers. I'm using Tombow markers, which is a water-soluble marker, which means that once I've put the color down, I can take a paintbrush with water on it, and the color activates with the water. I love these markers so much, but I do have to say that if you ever do want to try these, I recommend getting a different brand, because these ones are actually not lightfast, which means that within a few months or a couple of years, the color is going to actually fade. That's just something to be aware of when you're using different supplies. If you want your artwork to last for a long time, I just suggest doing research beforehand to make sure that whatever supply you're using is actually lightfast. Some people don't really care because they're just art journaling just for the sake of creating, and they're not really worried about it lasting for a super long time. But at the same time, it is really sad when you put so much work into something and after a few months or a few years, you go back to look at it and it's like fading already. I'm going to put links to the different supplies I'm using down in the description box, and when I do link to the different supplies, I'll include some watercolor markers that are actually lightfast, as well as these Tombows. So I'm just going to continue to add color. I'm going to be layering on top of this as well to add in more shadows. I want the flowers to look like they're sitting behind the scroll. So to get this effect, I'm going to add shadows on the flowers right up next to the paper. And this just makes it look like the light is casting a shadow from the paper onto the flower. I'm also adding shadows underneath each of the petals just to kind of give it more of a 3D effect. And then I just continue to add layers until I'm happy with the way that it looks. Adding several layers gives it more vibrancy, it really makes it pop, and it gives it depth. Also, creating greater highlights and deeper shadows really makes it stand off the page. So even the flowers that I drew have meaning. To me, flowers represent life. And of course, that has significance because Christ is the light and the life of the world. When I'm creating an art journal page, all of the different elements that I put on the page all have some kind of meaning. So in the end, you have this visual representation of your testimony and the things that you're learning in the scriptures. And it's just a really beautiful reminder of what you felt and what you learned. So anyway, now I'm starting to add the background. I originally wanted to use a gray color, but I felt like that would be too boring. So I added a little bit of a light blue color to it as well, and I really watered it down so that it wasn't super thick at first because I wanted to build up those layers. As I was painting the background, I made sure to really get in those details behind the paper so that you could tell that there were like rips and tears in the paper. Once I've added my first layer, I'm just going to continue to add several layers, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave it really light around the paper and around the flowers, and I'm going to make it darker around the edges. And I'm going to make the corners the darkest part. The reason why I'm doing this is because when you make the edges of your paper darker, you're kind of giving your art page a frame. Adding a frame or a vignette to your art journal page will make it look complete, and it really brings it all together. So another way that you can make your art journal pages look complete and polished is by adding some outlines and some highlights to your picture as well. Also, remember this is an art journal, so you can use any of the space that you want for journaling or keeping notes as well. I really love to write down some of the thoughts that I had while I was studying, or I'll record my testimony, or sometimes I'll even make a note of the scriptures that really stood out to me or quotes that go along with what I'm learning. But really, the whole point of this art journaling with the Come Follow Me curriculum is so that we can come closer to the Lord. So do whatever's best for you and serves that purpose. Now, one of the last things I'm going to do is outline everything on the page. I try to avoid really dark, solid outlines because it makes your work look really cartoony. Of course, if that's the look you're going for, then that's okay. But I generally like to make it look a little sketchy and broken up. And on these flowers, I'm actually going to go back over them with a white paint pen. For me, I just really like the way that it looks. But of course, you can do whatever you want. It's really just a style preference. That's the beauty about art journaling. You get to just do whatever the heck you want. Okay, so guys, I've been really into mixed media art journaling for a little over a year now. I mean, I've always created art for as long as I can remember, but as soon as I got into mixed media, I just fell in love. I loved art journaling so much, I decided to start a YouTube channel to share my art. Pretty quickly after I started my YouTube channel, I felt inspired to start this Come Follow Me art journaling project and to create a community around it. It just felt like it was the perfect way to enjoy my hobby in a really meaningful way, but also in a way that would bring light to others. But I don't want to just share my art, I really want to see what you guys create. I know there's a lot of beginner artists, and there's definitely a bunch of artists that are way better than me, and I'd honestly love to see it all. So if you want to share, I really want to see your art. If you post it to Instagram, use the tag CFM Art Journaling, stands for Come Follow Me Art Journaling. So no art journaling page is complete without doodles. I'm using a white Posca paint pen because I do want it to be more part of the background. I don't want it to stand out so much because I am going to be writing over it later. When I doodle on my art journal pages, the doodles always have some kind of meaning. The first thing that I drew was a little sun, and the reason why I drew that is because it represents Christ as the light of the world. I drew that first because I feel like the Book of Mormon first and foremost represents Christ. Then I drew a little picture of the temple. To me, temples represent the covenants that we make with God, and it represents the plan of salvation. And I drew a little representation of my family, because the Book of Mormon teaches us that families can be together forever. I drew these different pictures because I feel like that's what the Book of Mormon represents and teaches, and that's what makes them so meaningful. And the very last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to write the title for my art journal, and I left that space blank so that I could journal on that later, and I actually put the quote by Ezra Taft Benson that I read to you earlier in that space. Another thing that I didn't record is, on the back of that page, I painted the whole thing the same color as the background color that I had on there, and I plan to use that page for more journaling throughout the week. So that's pretty much it, guys. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you get notified when I post new videos every Sunday. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.